Y'all, this episode, oh my goodness. So I'm going to give you a little bit of context. So I am really in a space of my life again where I feel comfortable and confident researching about birth and pregnancy and postpartum and all the things that have to do with it, especially after my loss. This was or were topics that I wasn't really comfortable to touch, but I feel that I'm in a space again where I'm like, okay, I feel, I can open this up again. And that's how I came across Karissa's work when I was just doing my own little research in my own little bubble. And Karissa is a physiologist, a birth worker, and she is the founder of Wavework. And I was immediately fascinated by what she'd created, because Wavework is a method that bridges biomechanics, nervous system science, and altered states of consciousness to prepare the body for birth. And her work really reframes labor as an initiated state of expanded awareness and teaches women how to condition their physiology for intensity, coherence, and trust. And after supporting hundreds of women through birth, trauma healing, and psychedelic integration, Karissa created Wavework to bring the body back to the center of birth. And she's really passionate about helping women rehearse the intensity before they meet it, rewire their nervous systems for safety,
to the podcast of
and then
Iris
return
Josephina.
to their power
If
as
you're
creators
passionate
of life.
about exploring
And
the
I
menstrual cycle,
immediately
cyclical
connected
living,
to
body
Karissa's
wisdom,
work
personal
because,
growth,
I've
spirituality,
seen it
and
all.
running
I've been
business
a
in
birth
alignment
worker.
with your
I've
natural
worked in
cycles,
birth.
you're in the right place.
I've connected,
I'm Iris.
with
I'm an entrepreneur,
midwives,
functional hormone
gynecologists,
specialist,
system
trainer, and
about
coach.
birth preparation
and
and
I'm
how
on a
to
mission
prepare for
to
birth.
share insights,
And
fun facts, and inspiration
simultaneously,
I discover
I have
along
also
the way
worked with
as I run my
Indigenous
business
midwives
and walk my own
and
path on
Indigenous birth
Here,
preparation.
you'll hear my personal
And
stories, guest interviews.
on the one
and
hand,
vulnerable shares from
I
clients
found
and students.
certain birth
Most
preps
people know
like
me
too
from Instagram,
dry
where you can
and too
find me
disconnected
under
and too
@psychoseeds,
scientific.
or they
And
have
on the
been a
other
coaching
hand, I
client or
found it
student in
too,
one of my courses.
let's call it
I'm so
spiritual
grateful you're
and
here.
ungrounded.
Let's dive into today's episode.
And when I found Karissa's work, I was like, yes, she is completely into biomechanics. She understands the nervous system. She's a physiologist, but she's also a birth worker. And she understands that birth and the threshold of birth really tip us over into altered states of consciousness, because this is how I experience it. This is how I feel it. I have like this prediction in my body that my birth experiences are going to be extremely trippy. And I've heard people talk about birth as a plant medicine journey or like massive altered states of consciousness. And so for myself, when I felt this, this opening to research about pregnancy, research about birth, research about postpartum, I'm like, okay, I want to find a course to prepare myself. And I am someone who loves to go to the edges when I do things, when I learn new things. And what I love about Karissa's work and how she brings it into the world is that she understands that we need to be prepared in our physiology, in our body, in our nervous systems for the intensity that is labor and for the intensity that is birth. And when I found all of that out, I was like, she gets it. So I wrote her and I invited her onto the podcast because I think she's a really inspiring person, and we had a blast. You'll see. We had a blast. And I hope that this conversation can bring you different perspectives on labor, pregnancy, birth, all things, and that it may open you up for potential in your body. Like, I believe our physiology is such a fertile ground for all this potential and to meet ourselves in so many ways. And I feel, like I said, that birth will be one of those gigantic, trippy initiations. And I feel that with Karissa's work, I have a very aligned companion to prepare myself and my partner for the process whenever we are blessed to be pregnant again. So enjoy this conversation. Let us know what you feel about it. And in the show notes, you will also find a discount because you're listening to this podcast for Karissa's Wavework course. You cannot find this discount anywhere else. It's just exclusively for this podcast. And so go check it out when you feel inspired and enjoy listening to this episode. You're listening to the podcast of Iris Josephina. If you're passionate about exploring the menstrual cycle, cyclical living, body wisdom, personal growth, spirituality, and running a business in alignment with your natural cycles, you're in the right place. I'm Iris. I'm an entrepreneur, functional hormone specialist, trainer, and coach, and I am on a mission to share insights, fun facts, and inspiration I discover along the way as I run my business and walk my own path on Earth. Here, you'll hear my personal stories, guest interviews, and vulnerable shares from clients and students. Most people know me from Instagram, where you can find me under @CycleSeeds, or they have been a coaching client or student in one of my courses. I'm so grateful you're here. Let's dive into today's episode. Welcome everyone to a new episode. I am here with Karissa, and she is the founder of Wavework, or she created the method of Wavework, and I was absolutely mind blown and inspired when I first saw her work. So welcome to the show, Karissa.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate being on.
So let's start at the beginning. Like, who are you? And what is the path or the initiation that led you into birth work in the first place, and then to create the method that you have created?
Yeah, totally. How many hours do you have? I'm just kidding. We'll just start with the basics here. So my trade is in physiology, female physiology, and I got my bachelor's degree focusing on that. And I really thought that my initial path was going to be oriented around pre-physical therapy and moving in the direction of just, being based in the body. And my work really led me to some truly incredible corporate opportunities. So I'd say like the vast majority of my corporate career has been within the corporate wellness space. So I've worked in Manhattan and in Boston for a few years at MIT, and really just kind of supporting people through their well-being within the context of their work-life balance. It went much deeper than that within the framework of my roles. And, I did a lot of, initiatives within these places of work to really promote getting people into their bodies and helping them separate out of the logical thinking brain and getting them back into living inside their bodies, and what that meant for them as, just productive members of society. And amidst all of this, I've always had this kind of, deep yearning. I think I'm just one of those people who, beginning in like middle school, I've had this low-lying fire lit within my core to just make an impact and like really help people within their, especially women, within their wellness. I grew up as a dancer and teaching dance classes, and I was like, I'm going to have some kind of, I didn't know at the time. I was like making things up in 7th grade. I'm like, I'm going to have a dance studio. I'm going to have I'm going to have some kind of like mental health, like fitness space. So this was kind of like before I came into what this really is. I've always had this nothing is enough kind of, especially this day and age, especially for women. So I've had this passion. And meanwhile, I'm going through, a lot of my own like threshold work through some health challenges that I've had in hormonal health, things that have brought me to awaken to what the medicalized system looks like for women right now, and has really led me down the path of realizing that my passion for helping women really started with, I have to go through my own initiation through holistically supporting myself. And that was very messy. And it was a long journey of me just discovering that what women have access to is not enough. And most women just don't have the resources or the bandwidth to even figure out, how they can support themselves holistically. So that being said, I'm on my own journey with that. And then ultimately, I hit this breaking point of recognizing that, the corporate space for me was not supporting my health in that way. And that was kind of my my breaking point of taking the leap on, I have all these resources now, and really just like pouring into getting myself specifically involved in pre-postnatal work as much as possible, and through my own education in that space. And I just poured years of work into working for other companies to give me just volume of working in the trenches with women, especially through their birth preparation journeys. And it just evolved into me meeting so many women globally that were inviting me into their birth space. And I was like, I don't even know what that looks like. I guess I have to become a doula. I guess I have to I entered the doula workspace just as a byproduct of women wanting to invite me into their birth support space. So that being said, I kind of dove into that and never looked back. I believe that my calling kind of unfolded as I unfolded. And so it was just really, really beautiful, because I had never, my history with birth related work is that I can remember as a child, I'm the oldest daughter of 3, and by 10 years. So when my brother was born, I was 10, and my parents invited me into the hospital room with them. And I remember when the older of my 2 brothers was born, I'm watching my mom get an epidural, and she's screaming, and they messed it up. And there was so much trauma there. And I remember thinking, I never want to give birth. How do women do this all the time? This is awful. And then thinking about all of the women who are just giving birth every day. And it just kind of gave me an aversion to I'm personally childless right now. And I do, have a dream of having my own children. But it was so interesting because I just remember, I held that with me so closely, and I didn't actually ever think about it until this work started unfolding with me, and how I've just distanced myself from, just birth in general. Even when my friends were pregnant, I'm like, I don't understand why you want to go through that. Right. So then I start supporting all of these births, and I'm firsthand, seeing behind the curtain, especially with a lot of hospital births. And it's really sad. And there's a lot of grief there for me that I had to also move through. And so how this all unfolded was really just watching, just recognizing this, again, back to that yearning within me of we're here as birth workers, and I'm obviously very body-based. My work is in neuroscience and physiology and biomechanics and all of that beautiful stuff. And a woman can have all of these tools, and yet if she's in this birth space and she's outsourcing her power to an authority or even a doula, she's taking so much of this baggage with her into her postpartum experience, even if she had this ideal birth experience from start to finish. And birth after birth after birth, even, home births that I've attended. And like I said, births that are, seemingly fitting the mold of what women would probably want their birth to look like, right? There's still this outsourcing of power that's not keeping them sovereign in that space. And this is a collective issue. And again, even the doulas who have all of this, extra education and knowledge to pass on to their clients to prep them, which is amazing. And I feel very grateful that I have this extra support that I can provide from my own framework of knowledge. But you can't, I always talk about through my content, you can't logical mind your way through birth. It has to be in the body and it has to be embodied. And so you can know as much as you want. You can know all about all of the interventions. You can know all about the physiological process of birth as much as you want. And that doesn't save you from, having the sovereign birth experience that most women ultimately, I think, would like to have. And that's shaping literally how, women are mothering and how we're entering relationships and how we're carrying all of this, through this threshold of matrescence. So that is, kind of where this work has led me. And so from being within this, the sacred spaces of all of these births, I just felt so called to help women and make much better use of my time through creating tools for women to, prepare themselves in the way that actually makes sense for them to have these types of births. And I still love supporting births. I don't do it as frequently, but I really believe in pouring myself now into this. This isn't my method. This is something that just kind of was birthed through me, through these experiences. And I feel so passionately about, even giving birth workers this framework, this toolkit to, better support their clients as well. So this is something that just kind of was inevitable for me. And it was like, I almost like, if I didn't create this program or course or framework, I would be unwell. I would genuinely be like not living in my truth, knowing everything that I know, and like just having the blessing of all of the years of obsessive education that I've, poured into myself, to not share that in a way that feels resonant for women. And, a lot of women don't even have the language for, how I speak about birth right now, but they feel it. And that to me is so powerful. And that's really the point of it. It's to be felt beyond, understanding. So, yeah.
Beautiful. And I love how your path to get here has been like a true journey of initiation on so many levels, actually starting when you were 10 years old, when you witnessed your mother birth and completely, maybe even a bit like shut down around this whole process that birth is. And then you open up to it again when you got older. And it's something I can very much relate to. I think my own birth, which was 2.5 months early through C-section, very traumatic for both me and my mom, has led me into being so interested in natural birth and accidentally witnessing birth on my anthropological research in India, and then becoming a doula. So I can understand like the layers of your journey, and also the feeling of something being a non-negotiable, that you just have to do this because you feel it is your life's path, your life's work, and then feeling not sharing this with the world, that would be a disservice towards your people, your audience, but also your innate calling in this lifetime. So
absolutely.
Thank you for sharing that. And you've already shared a little bit about how the kind of work that you're doing now has kind of been birthed in the birth room, and the work that you do, or the method that you carry out into the world, is called Wavework. For those who hear about it for the first time, what makes it different from like the typical birth prep that most of us encounter when we go to our midwife or to the hospital, or just find in the more mainstream spaces?
Yeah, totally. I love this question because, even as a doula, as I was really starting to build my framework for okay, how am I preparing my clients for birth? And I'm out and I'm searching for, all of the best beyond, my body-based practices. I'm very anchored in like pelvic floor work and, teaching women to connect there. But beyond that, like childbirth education, right? And what are the tools that I can provide? And, really what's out there is, teaching about childbirth in a very fundamental sense, right? Like, here's the anatomy and here's how the baby moves through the cardinal positions. And, teaching generally, yes, it's important to, if we're looking at ACOG and looking at the guidelines for birth, right? Like movement is important, hydration is important, nourishment is important, having, emotional support is important. And then I think like the basic information that women kind of understand that they get told is that, and I speak on this a ton, but I go much deeper into it, but how, the most common reason for stalled labor is not to do with something malfunctioning mechanically in the body, but it does malfunction mechanically as a byproduct of environmental factors and misalignment and misattunement with the birthing body. So I think the interesting thing, not interesting, it's frustrating that, this information is out there and then, the misattunement, environmentally speaking, is birthing in a hospital room with all of these bright lights and these people coming in and out of the room and strangers. And, that gets stored in the body as fear and lack of ability to be totally vulnerable with this process. And so it's like this catch-22 for women where like maybe they understand that to a degree, but it's like, well, I'm birthing in the hospital. So that is what it is. Right. And personally, like, I don't take a stance on, home births over hospital births versus, free births versus, birth center births. It's just, once you have acquired this information, you make your own judgment call in terms of what feels aligned for you. I'm going through this process and I actually started, it was really interesting. I started working with a lot of women in like this birth prep space. And I started putting women through, they're like, well, what is birth going to feel like? Like, how can I prepare my body beyond like learning, breath work or, doing like self-hypnosis work and entering trance state and, how to shut out the external world if that's all you can do. And so I was like, well, you're going to have to figure out how to allow your body to meet, pressure and intensity and discomfort and pain. And we can label it, whatever we want. Some people have quote unquote pain-free births or orgasmic births. And other women are like, I had a great birth, but it was so painful. And I think there's a lot of nuance there with someone's relationship to pain. And then beyond that, it's like just the label itself and like what that word holds. And if it's not a word that holds, more neutrality, then you're going to, put it on some side of the spectrum. But whatever we want to call it, contraction, pressure wave, intensity, I was working with these women who were, like, how do I do this? And I was like, well, let's put you in positions of discomfort and basically simulate practice going through kind of like the work to rest ratio of being in a birthing position, holding some intense discomfort, trying to maintain a trance state. And then beyond that, we would integrate then, almost like you're on a little journey. And then we look for these different patternings in the body where you're holding resistance physically in your fascia, or where they're holding tension in the mind, or where they notice their mind going if they left the trance because of the discomfort, or, what that looked like, right? So it just started developing into this like beautiful kind of this beautiful system. And like, my clients would come out on the other side of birth and say like, that was the most valuable thing that I could have learned going into birth. Like, my body was genuinely ready to maybe not meet the true intensity of a pressure wave or a contraction, but they were beyond the childbirth education class, or, like putting their birth plan together that didn't even get followed, at all, because there's so many, birth is unknown. So you can have, whatever birth plan you want. And at the end of the day, if you're not ready to surrender to, what's going to come your way, be that the actual intensity of the contractions, where they're going to happen, when they're going to happen, who you're going to be with when that occurs, right? This is taking the power back, right? This is a woman who has met intensity before, and she knows that she has to take responsibility for the intensity that's about to come. And then everything around her can support her and amplify all of that for her. So to answer the question, Wavework, the actual system of it is really taking a woman through the layers of birth. So the different facets of birth that I see in my mind broken down, which is physical body prep. So like, what are the biomechanics of birth? How do we connect to not just strengthening the pelvic floor, but building neuromuscular relationship to the pelvic floor, and what that means for birth, where we're holding, pregnancy discomforts and pains in the body, and maybe how that translates to where we're holding tension in the fascia, and what that might indicate in terms of your birth experience and how the baby is going to navigate. So that's kind of what I call like wave one, and just deepening this like body-based work and understanding that. And then wave two is really like understanding the emotional component of all of this and how we store, our tissues are, especially the cervix, it just holds memory. Pelvic floor the tissue holds all of our emotional memory. And so once you have this foundation of, being in your body, understanding how to move, the biomechanics of birth, having a really deep and strong connection to the pelvic floor, then we can move into this emotional layer. And there's so much in the mainstream birth prep space on clearing fear, clearing emotions. And I think that's just like, I understand what they're trying to do and say, and yet I think it's almost a little bit toxic to not invite fear into the birth room and to say, well, I have a fear of death. I have a fear of dying during childbirth, which I think is, not discussed openly, because women don't want to accept that that is a main fear. And right, like fear, we avoid feeling fear because fear feels like death. So if we can start to use emotional cathexis, and basically cathexis is to befriend our emotions, versus catharsis, which is to release, to remove, to clear these emotions. If we can start to teach the body, like, this is what, I'm just referring to fear because, there's a lot of fear leading up to birth, but, fear is a byproduct of, it's right below our rage and our anger as women, who we've been told to, it's shameful to feel those emotions, especially in our, hormonal seasons. And so if we can really teach the body to deeply befriend the sensation, not what the fear is, but the sensation of fear. What does that feel like in the body? It feels electric. It feels, the nervous system is lit up, and where we hold that, if we can start to not be afraid of fear itself, then we can actually have this power to move through that energy, versus holding on to it in the tissues. And where that gets stored is really like in the psoas muscle. And that muscle being tense and tight during birth is actually going to limit the mobility of the pelvis itself. And so, there's a lot of birth prep out there too, like some amazing, body-based work to like release the psoas and do that. And yes, that, and, I think the main medicine that women need to release the psoas is to feel deeply and create containers for themselves where they can feel these, scary emotions and alchemize that. And as a byproduct, we're kind of hydrating our tissues, and we're allowing them to release and surrender, because we're not negating the charge that's within the body. So that's kind of like the wave two. And then beyond that, we move into talk a lot about the altered state of birth and remaining in trance state and how birth is very psychedelic. And I think that's just like a trendy way for me to like kind of explain that, yeah, I mean, there's this whole hormonal cascade that's occurring. And if you're remaining in this trance state through a specific breath that I teach that connects to pelvic floor and to allow you to use this breath not only to remain in the body and to remain connected to our root, but this breath also is going to allow us to create our own oxytocin. So as birth workers, as doulas, right, we're always like, how can we get our clients to create more oxytocin? How can we? But if the birthing woman understands this and can take responsibility for, oh, I understand that it is my job, it is my responsibility to remain in this trance state. It is not anyone else's job to help bring me back into it or remind me or coach me through, aspects of it. Great, sure. But once you're in this trance state through breath and through, amplification environmentally, and I talk a lot about like the frequency match of your environment, people, nervous systems in the space, anything in the birthing space, then you have access to all of the primal intelligence, which is the last wave, and the rhythm, the ritual, the relaxation of birth. So you won't have to be told, let's try this birth position. Let's go move your body. Let's go, do X, Y, and Z to try and move things along. If you're in trance, you have a constant channel to what you need to do and how you need to birth your baby. And beyond that, advocating, right? Like there's a lot of work that needs to be done around advocacy in the birth space, especially, but women can't advocate for themselves if they're not remaining in their body during birth and know what they even, if you're stuck in a state of fight or flight during your whole birth experience, you don't even know what you need because you think you know what you need because we're in this logical beta brain, right? But if we're in our trance state and we're accessing these theta brain waves, right? Then it's like, oh, well, I obviously need to move my body like this. I obviously need to be in this position. This is what feels, I have a connection to my baby. We're in, we're co-creating this experience together. And then, everyone else who you invite into your space can then support and, assist facilitation of whatever it is that you need versus expecting people to save you, to take care of you, to tell you what to do. This isn't their birth, right? And this is where that outsourcing starts to happen, is when we can't access the last wave, which is the primal intelligence of birth. And then once we've kind of like gone through this whole 4 waves separately, then the Wavework is this simulation almost of all of these waves merged together in rehearsal, and just to teach the nervous system, like, okay, now we're going to practice, we have early labor simulations, which is, typically more dynamic. Women are having longer rest periods. Not that it's not intense, but we can move our body more. We can go out for walks. We can get the heart rate up a little bit, and stay a little more distracted in that space. And then we anchor it into active labor, and we hold isometric and these, positions that are really challenging, uncomfortable for the duration of, a average labor wave. And we bring in the trance state, we bring in the breath, and we allow for creation of the experience and noticing how the body wants to move and create its own rhythm and what it craves during that time. And then we shift into a labor position so that we can, experience the push breath, the breath that I teach to remain in the theta state, the trance state. We practice this breath in all of these various positions so that it's, again, something the body has remembered when the time comes. And it's really, really powerful work. And even to do like 1 or 2 rehearsals before birth with this breath can really change the way a woman feels in her birth experience and the power that she feels. And I've seen it so many times firsthand at this point that it's so undeniable and just so incredibly powerful and it's accessible to every single woman, right? Like there's not a single person that can't practice something like this and rehearse something like this, whether you have resources for a birth, support, doula, midwife, or what have you, right? Like every single woman can take control through her body if she understands how to do that. So that's what Wavework is. And the last layer to that is then when you do have a birth support team, you can bring them into this practice with you. And I love that because, birth really is like this shared nervous system experience. So if you have a partner who's like, especially men don't really, this isn't their thing, right? Like, and if a woman's, trying and maybe doesn't even have all the tools herself, like how can we expect a partner other than a doula to understand how to actually support, right? Like there's a difference between like, what can I do for you? Or maybe the doula taught, some counter pressure techniques and we're, making sure we're managing the room and all of these great things. But when a partner, and especially a doula, right? Because there's a lot of doulas out there who feel like they need to be saviors, and I was there, so I get that. But if we can teach these birth partners how to maintain regulation in their bodies as a means for amplification of what this woman is doing.
I love this.
Yeah, because if we're not focusing equally on the people in the space and not regulating the nervous systems of the support, the woman can do all of the work she wants. And then we still have this mismatch in frequency in the space. And she's, whether she's in it to win it or not, she's adopting that. The veil is very thin, right? So we're absorbing any energies in the room. So it's really important for everybody to really be taking responsibility in this space and saying, I am, like, even as a birth worker now, like I will be the first one to say, I'm going to step out for a moment. I'm not, I need to regulate myself for X, Y, or Z reasons, right? It doesn't really matter. The point is that it doesn't matter what the reason is. You have to be attuned and aware enough to make that decision and have the tools then to, regulate yourself before you come back into the space. So then when we bring this rehearsal, we can bring these people into the rehearsal. And then it's really interesting because we have this whole integration session at the end and not only talk about what she was feeling and how, what that mirror was like for her, but what was it like for the birth support team? What was it like for your partner to be with you through that process and see you in a trance state, see you using your vocalization of your tone, your vocal toning? And is that foreign to your partner? And is that going to be like, ooh, like I've never heard her sound like that before. I've never heard her I've never seen her be in her body like this before, right? So there's so many layers to this, and it can go really deep or it doesn't need to, right? But it's a really beautiful practice for everyone who you're expecting to be in your space with you. And then everyone's on the same page, right? And it creates this really, really powerful birthing experience, no matter what the outcome is then, right? Because it doesn't matter. I mean, there's nuance to like where we're birthing, right? And we try and do our best, but some women just don't have that opportunity and that access. So that's kind of the point of Wavework too, is to say like, you can still take your power back, right? So yeah.
Yeah, that's beautiful. What came to mind when you were sharing is that it seems to also be very important that you work with your team long before the moment is there. And I feel a lot of the ways in which birth teams are constructed these days is just like, oh, I'm from the Netherlands, and there you go to a midwifery practice. There is multiple midwives. You've seen them once, and then, oh, it can be one of these 9 people present at your birth, and then you have seen them one time. You've not attuned to their nervous system before that. So I feel that there is already a mismatch before the whole process even starts. And these people can have immensely good intentions, but if they're not aware of that, I can see when you were sharing, I could see like the vibrational mismatch when that happens.
And you can see it. Yeah. If you just start, and that's like the power of even just like women mentioning, like just from my content alone and how I share it through language, it's like it's so undeniable when you start to look at all of those pieces of the puzzle, and it's not to say that we need to fire everybody, and like, that's kind of the nature of, birth too. Like you have to hire somebody that you haven't known your whole life, or maybe you have, and that could be like a blessing. That's not most people though. There has to be this level of trust and faith, and like, but also the more attuned you are with yourself and the more energy sensitive you can become, the easier it is to, kind of make that judgment call and have discernment, right? This work is all about increasing your level of discernment at the end of the day, so that there's this less of a gap in time for how long you need to be in someone or something's energy for it to feel misaligned. And, that's this numbness epidemic that we're experiencing with, the medicalized, well, not even just the medicalized birthing system, but as a society, especially in the United States, right? And this is the work that everybody needs to do so that we can have this rebound rate of, pivoting and shifting gears as fast as possible. And that only can happen if, we're taking responsibility for, enhancing our own attunement. Yeah.
Yeah. Beautiful.
Yeah.
As you're saying all of this, I'm thinking like, oh, my partner is so super intuitive and he picks up so much. So he's already having this.
Oh, amazing. Wow.
This extra sense where, his intuition is incredible.
It's so great to have a partner who's on that level too.
Yeah. And then going into this work on the same page, because this is another thing, like in a lot of cases, women prepare on their own. And then the moment of birth happens, and then this partner all of a sudden has to be there, and he's not been attuned in the entire process. And I've seen this as a doula, and I'm like, I've invited them in like over and over and over again, and they won't show up. And then in birth, like they faint, or they they have all these experiences. And I'm like, that's because you didn't prepare.
Yeah. And then, there's this joke about, being a top of the bed man. And the reason, so many men adopt that is because they just haven't been exposed enough to the nature of childbirth. And it's not, it's not their fault either. And we can't shame them for that. And yet there's got to be a willingness on both sides to, do equal amounts of work. And I think men are really waking up, and it's really beautiful to see that. And I'm so grateful because women are doing the work. I mean, they're putting the effort in, and, I think men are just like a little bit behind, a few years behind, like where women have, timeline wise, there are collective awakening, but yeah, it's really, really amazing to see, even just like, some of the content that I put out there, just like men, just really being here for it and, like sharing. And it's powerful when men can be in that space and not afraid of the power of a birthing woman. That's what it is, right? Like women are powerful. And yeah, that's the paradigm shift that we need to move towards is, men recognizing that their fear isn't actually like the childbirth itself. It's like seeing my woman be this like powerful birthing person. And I don't know how to hold that because no one ever taught me, and I've never seen it before. So
Yeah. Oh, bless them. Bless all these men waking up.
Truly, I know.
So you also teach that your cervix will not yield or open or do what it has to do when the nervous system feels unsafe. And I think this perspective, to me, it sounds absolutely logical.
Yeah.
But not many people like publicly connect the cervix to the nervous system. And how do you explain this, and how do you help people support their nervous system to really allow for this cervix to do what it needs to do?
Yeah, such a good question. And I think, this goes back to in the beginning when I was kind of referring to the most frequent, most prevalent reason for stalled labors is fear or mismatch in frequency, because that's what unalchemized fear is a mismatch in frequency and attunement, right? So it's not to say, I guess I should preface this part of the conversation with, it's not that the cervix will not open, but we can help support the cervix as a frequency gate, which is what I like to call it, because when you think of it as a frequency gate, a woman can be, and I'm sure you've seen this as a doula many times, but the classic example, I guess, is a woman laboring at home for a period of time, moving along really well. She feels really comfortable. She has her partner there. She has her doula there. The lights are dim. Maybe labor started at night when melatonin starts to rise and oxytocin starts to rise. And, things are moving and grooving. All of a sudden, we have to go to the hospital if that's where she's choosing to birth. And then we get to the hospital and it stalls, right? And that has nothing to do with, again, the mechanics of birth or her body not able to birth her baby or the size of her baby or what have you. This is quite literally an energetic shift that occurred. And, many things kind of simultaneously, being this is a symptom of a lot of factors, but main one being there's a shift in environmental frequency and less of a match for the cervix needing this high level of attunement and alignment, and likely the woman not knowing how to maintain her trance state while she's moving, if she's choosing to birth somewhere other than where she feels truly comfortable and vulnerable, then this is why this work is even more impactful and more important, because it doesn't then matter, where you're moving location wise, you're going to be able to maintain this connection to the cervix as a frequency gate. So when we use, like I said, when we use this breath to stay in trance, we're able to continually kind of create more efficient contractions through this. So when we're using breath to create more oxytocin, then we're able to just create efficiency. So it's really powerful. And like I said, you've probably noticed, like, as soon as a woman like kind of shifts, like she'll stall, and that's the frequency gate speaking. That's, a misalignment in her energy field. So, it's like, it's giving permission. The cervix is basically giving the body permission to birth a baby into a place that's safe. It's safety, right? So if we don't feel safe, and maybe she thinks she feels safe, but she doesn't, right? And then I've seen, so many births for like the opposite of that too, where, when a woman is not progressing in like whatever, time doesn't exist during this too, right? Like that's the whole like timeline collapse situation is we have to remember that there's no like dilation centimeter per hour. We have to remember that as long as the body feels safe, we can move from 5 centimeters to 10 centimeters and pushing in an hour.
Mm-hmm.
And
I've seen that.
Or the opposite, right? So, or we're moving from, early labor to now we're all of a sudden in active labor after 5 hours, and then we stall, right? So this can move in any direction and it can happen at any point. But the common denominator is always that when, labor tends to stall, and every birth is different. And I'm not saying that you can have like the most fast birth just because your entire environment is aligned. Like there's so many energetic layers to this too. But yeah, I would say fundamentally speaking, we can do a much better job to create efficiency with the cervix as like this frequency gate that it is, when we understand this work too. So.
Yeah, beautiful. This also makes me wonder, because obviously you need this trance state to access to this trance state, but I have seen women who couldn't access this part, and I'm just curious, what does this mean for, regardless how birth unfolds and regardless what the entire journey is, where it took place, if a woman cannot access this trance state or has like a difficulty, what does that mean for her experiential outcome of the birth? Like, how does she look back on her birth? And have you seen the differences in that by any chance?
Yeah, I mean, I really do believe this is why we have, such an epidemic of postpartum depression too.
That's what I was aiming at.
There's many layers to this, of course. Obviously, matrescence in and of itself is massive, right? It's a biggest shift in hormones and physiology in life. It's huge, massive shift in responsibility. It's huge, massive shift in identity. And then when you layer on, a type of birth where, you mentioned the trance state specifically and having trouble like staying within that and staying in the theta brainwave state, you add that baggage almost to maybe a woman, even if she wasn't told, anything shameful by anyone in her space, maybe she believes, she failed because she wasn't able to have this perfect, experience for whatever reason, whether it was her inability to maintain that. And usually, if women do prep work, there's usually something external that starts to unfold, that this is never black and white ever. But yeah, I mean, this really shapes the way women mother, and it's carried with them. And then, you add in postpartum lack of sleep, like the sleep deprivation aspect is huge hormonally, obviously, and like contributing to mood and ability to be present in the motherhood journey. And yeah, it really is so many women too. And I think women are starting to talk more openly about it and realize that, it's not shameful. It's just the system's lack of proper preparation for an experience that is so primal, right? Like, we are so grateful for the current technology that we have and the medical system when we need it. And, most births don't need anything other than, a present woman who's able to be in her body. And no one tells women that. And that's why we need to spread the message far and wide so that, this isn't just about birth trauma. This isn't just about having a certain type of birth. This is about the rest of your life, how you're carrying this experience with you. There's always going to be a level of trauma in birth. It's physical trauma to the body. huge energetic rupture. It's a threshold, and it's an ego death, and it's all these things that women don't realize, right? And like, you know, if you're not used to moving through like a birth and death cycle on the regular, and like, you know, shedding parts of yourself that, and grieving and crying and meeting fear and meeting, you know, this emotional body that we've, you know, suppressed so deeply. Yeah, we're gonna struggle through the postpartum season and beyond, and then chalk it up to like, there's something wrong with you, when there's not. When there's nothing wrong with you, except that a system that failed women entirely. So
Yeah, I feel that modern culture has, you know, made it so easy for women to disconnect from this primal intelligence, because not so much in our society facilitates connecting to that. And it's really painful. Like, the more that I dive into it and see it happen and hear stories and witness, it's very hard. And
yeah,
I feel that this kind of work can potentially help people to begin to remember that. And when you were sharing just now, there was like an image that I had that just popped into my mind. I studied with two indigenous midwives, one from Colombia and one from Mexico. And they share that at a certain point in labor and in birth, regardless of whether it's a C-section or a natural birth, there will be a moment where the birthing person or a woman throws her eyes back into her mind. And they describe that moment as, this is where the woman's soul collapses, gets out of the body to get the baby and come back to the body. And that's always like stayed with me, because they were like so adamant about this.
Wow.
And now that I'm hearing all of the things that you're doing and you're sharing, this is why it's so important to be in the body, so that you know where to return to when that moment comes. Yeah, that's just a little addition. That's what I thought about when you were.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. That's incredible.
Yeah, because imagine you're not in the body and you have to like put your entire soul out. Like, you don't know where to return if you're not present.
Right. Right. And if you're not, you know, acquainted with, you know, other realms the way we are, and that whole concept is foreign, especially not being in the body.
Yeah. And then I also have one of my last questions, because I know we're like on time. Can Wavework also support people like in the postpartum and through loss and through preconception? And what does that look like?
Yeah. Wavework is just such a metaphor for life, and really just how we meet thresholds in life. And birth is just obviously the physical manifestation of that ultimate threshold that we can experience. But it's really not how we, it's not just about how we birth, it's how we're integrating thresholds. So especially women who maybe didn't get to have the birth experience that they wished for whatever reason, whether that be postpartum, and they're recognizing like, I outsourced my power. I didn't get to allow my body to move through the process, through breath, through movement, through fascia repair, whether that was because of intervention or cesarean birth or loss even. Wavework really like allows the body to move through that energy of birth. And honestly, I think it's really powerful to utilize the framework of Wavework to birth projects. I birthed Wavework by utilizing Wavework. And it's, like I said, it's really just an opportunity to allow the body to move through the waves of contraction release and to, allow you to move through this next threshold, this new identity. And so it can be, you mentioned more like postpartum loss, I think preconception is an incredible time to use to start, preparing with Wavework, because there's never too late. There's never too early, really. I mean, your timing is your timing. And I get these questions all the time. It's like, I'm 38 weeks. Like, would this benefit me? I think I want to have children in 3 years. Like, can I start now? The answer is always yes, because this is individual timing. And beyond that, this is fascia memory. This is just hormonal recalibration via, like vagal toning and lymphatic drainage, and, fertility is a byproduct of that. And, it's just an opportunity to, like I said, to move through the wave at every phase and stop fragmenting ourselves so we can become whole through every portal in life.
That's beautiful. And to close off, I wanted to ask you if you could whisper one thing to every woman who is preparing to meet birth. Like, what would you want her to remember about her body?
Yeah, that's such an important closing remark. And I think, we've created such a performance out of birth, and we compare to other women, and we compare to other birth stories. And at the end of the day, I think the takeaway message is really that, birth isn't a performance. It's something that you need to just allow to unfold. And when you have the right tools, you are the rhythm, and you don't really need anyone else or anything else to, move you through whatever that experience is going to look like for you. Because birth is, I always say birth is the ultimate mirror. And you're going to receive medicine from that, and you're going to receive exactly what you need from your birth. It's almost like, a psychedelic journey, right? You get the journey that you need, not the one that you want. So, that's why it's so important to kind of know when to put a pin in intellectualizing birth and when to start getting it into the body. Because at the end of the day, like I said, you can know everything you need to know about the science and the prep and the, all of the things. And yet you're still going to be incredibly humbled at the end of the journey in one way, shape, or form. And that's going to be the medicine of the experience for you. So
beautiful. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if people who listen to this are super inspired and they want to find you, what are the best places to find you and your work?
Yeah, I'm on Instagram and on TikTok at wavework.birthing. Those are the best places.
Perfect. And I'll also paste your links in the show notes so people can find you. Thank you so much for all of the incredible work that you've done to get here. And thank you for sharing your work with the world and feeling this devotion for people to know this. And thank you so much for your time to come on here and share about it.
Yeah, I'm so happy to. Thank you so much for having me. I really, really appreciate it.
Okay, this wraps up today's episode. Thank you so much for listening. Want to know more about me? The best way to reach me is via @CycleSeeds on Instagram. And if you heard something today and you think, oh my God, wow, I learned something new, feel free to share the podcast on your social media and tag me. Or leave a review or rating. In this way, you help me reach more people like you. Thank you so much.